Again, thanks for everybody joining. I got a whole ton of pictures to go through. The more I tried to pick them out last night, it was like, oh, I got to use this one, this one, this one. And it was funny because I didn't think that the federal and state area was going to have so much of interest besides the New York State Pavilion. And just more and more things kept coming up. So I'm going to go and get my first picture here, ready to go. I will try to put it in full screen mode so I don't get chastised for not doing that. So let me start sharing the screen. And here we go. Okay, folks should see again the same chart I've started the last couple weeks, the plot map of the site. We're going to be in the federal and state area, which in 1939 mentioned earlier was more in the industrial area. And as a result, you have some things like Westinghouse, which ended up in the state area, even though it was a company, and we'll go into some of that. So we'll start, we're going to go alphabetically again, jumping into Alaska, one of our new states. We're looking down from the New York State Pavilion, and they had this great igloo area, and they also had a tremendous area in the back. If you look behind it, there was an empty area, a lawn that was supposed to be the state of Virginia. They changed their mind, didn't participate. So that was part of the problem we know the fair had, that people ran out of money, they ran out of issues or different things to do it. But Alaska was there, like most of the other states were at this time, to try to encourage tourism. Back in the 39 fair, a lot of states were there trying to get people to come and participate for the fact that you buy their raw natural products, you could hire their labor, it was more for commercial stuff. But by 64, there was a lot of people getting ready to travel. Jet travel was becoming a big thing with the introduction of the Boeing 707, other aircraft. So come on out to Alaska, see the final frontier, which I have finally made all 50 states, and Alaska was my last one. But outside, they had these totem poles. The sign will tell you that it was actually interesting. They were there for the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. They've come to be at the 64 World's Fair, and if you go to Alaska, they're still on display up there today. And I thought this was an interesting set of the old and the new, the old totem poles going vertically, and the New York State Pavilion, the modern sort of monument we have to life. They had a guy out back. He was carving these totem poles, and again, these are on display in a park in Alaska today. I think they did a total of 3 of them that were done at the fair. Alaska had out front the big dome area. Inside this, where all the exhibits were. And so actually, not some of the exhibits were in the back too. We'll see them in a minute. But all the shops inside. And one of the things you'd see when you went inside, you could get attacked by various types of bears. You could get attacked by a polar bear. You could go out and get a brown Kodiak bear. There was a lot going on at the Alaska Pavilion to try to convince people they had things that the rest of the states didn't have. Displays of animal pelts. I don't think you could buy these for a souvenir, but you could certainly come and see them. They had a whole bunch of displays about their fish, their bighorn sheep, their other wildlife. Here's one of the totem poles the guy had been carving, and you could come out here and get your picture taken. This is the little man on the totem pole. You could also go out, and they had things for the kids to play with. They had fake igloo here. I just posted this on Facebook about a week or so ago, and people were trying to figure out what on earth the animal is inside the igloo. And they also had displays of wild dogs and wolves and that. Down below, don't know if you can see the writing so much, it's warning you, it's danger, high voltage, don't open up the shed. So I always get a kick of looking back at things in 1964 and trying to figure out where the OSHA folks were. We're going to go down Bourbon Street, was also originally known as Louisiana's Bourbon Street. The state of Louisiana sponsored it, and the idea here, you have that big white marquee over the head of the nuns. There was a show inside that was going to be a spectacular thing, America Be Seated. It was basically a minstrel show. Fastest closing show at the fair, only had a handful of performances. And the talk there was that Michael Todd Jr. was going to use this then to stage different musical acts after his show failed. He originally was going to have a riverboat out on the lake. That fell through. He was going to have shows here. They never had any luck with getting anybody to perform here. So as time went by, you had that particular signage. the word Louisiana disappeared because the state realized this thing is losing money. We don't want to have anything to do with it. And there was a real talk for a period of time that this pavilion was going to close very, very early in the fair, not just the dinner show, but the entire thing. So they did a restructuring, got the state of Louisiana, was able to extricate themselves from it. They sold some bonds to it, and it became just Bourbon Street. Still had the big marquee to advertise shows that never came to be. Over time, they said, okay, we got to change that, get rid of the figures on either side, change the sign, and just get people to come in here and see what Bourbon Street is all about. If you were looking at it from the outside of the area, there was not a lot to attract you to tell you to why to come in. Big empty white walls at first. Down in the bottom right corner was a fried chicken restaurant that had a little activity. But for the most part, you just walk by and there was nothing really to tell you why you wanted to come inside. And inside, they had recreations of streets from New Orleans. Over here, we can see there was an animal state university. You could come and see trained animals hopping and doing different tricks. But most of it was either restaurants or stalls selling food or souvenir items. You could come, here's one of the stars of the animal show. A monkey would come out, happily beg for money and give it to his caretaker. As time went on, they realized things like the animal shows were not a big draw, so they started putting in more things for the adults. And it became one of the more popular areas for the fair at night. So we had Jazzland with Maynard Ferguson, a known name person, draw the crowds in. People came up here to Danceland, Jazzland. You had all sorts of things, the Bistro Bar. So this was the area that got more activity at night than it did during the day. And you can see they were trying to promote a Mardi Gras atmosphere. I thought it was, great that the dumpsters are always on display. A lot of these people built things and they didn't think about the infrastructure for how do you make that a little less jarring on the eye. A lot of the shops never opened. They didn't get the business, so they had put up these nice lace iron balconies to representative of New Orleans, but the shops didn't actually come to be, so you ended up with either empty windows on the right or pictures like the one in the middle just taking up the space. You could come and pose for Mardi Gras floats. As we can see, the witch or whatever the hag in the center is kind of missing its hand. Another shot here, you could come by and get it done. These things didn't last very long. In New Orleans for Mardi Gras, they can go down the street, be seen, and then that's the end of it. Here in New York, people like to climb on them, get their pictures taken, and they frankly just weren't built for it. They were built by people that actually built floats for the Mardi Gras parades, which, again, they held up well for one purpose, but not so well for the other. You could also come and get your portraits done. There were a number of sketch artists that performed and sold pictures throughout there. And at night, you could see that even Belgian waffles were now introduced into New Orleans. You could go to the Voodoo shop, which I've never seen an interior shop. I'd love to see what they actually sold in there. And as mentioned at night, it was a big popular area. This is a very famous go-go disco dancer, Candy Johnson. Somebody said, oh, she's got a Band-Aid in her toe. She must have made some tough landings. But she was very, very popular. They used her in the titles for a number of movies. She was very well known. And they put a giant, I think it was life-size, even larger, cutout of her outside the building to draw people in. And it was the thing that kept the Bourbon Street going over time, was the nightclubs and people like her. Further down the road, we get to Hollywood, USA. Originally, the state of California had agreed to participate. They were going to have a thing all about California with a tiny little bit about Hollywood. And then the state dropped out, and then an entrepreneur said, I'm going to put in the Hollywood Pavilion. So they had several concepts here. One was that they had sets, and you can see some of the shows that are listed there. Cleopatra, Gunsmoke, West Side Story, King and I. They actually used props from the real movies or TV shows, put them on display, and then they would do live reenactments so you could come out and see supposedly how movies are made. So for those of us in California, we would recognize Grauman's Chinese Theater. For Disney folks, you might recognize the sadly lamented and lost Great Movie Ride. Down in front, the squares, you can see different color squares in the pavement. That's because of people putting their signatures in it. We'll see that in a moment. And again, they had reenactments of how the movies were done. So they had quite a bit of things done with West Side Story. They'd have pre-recorded music playing, people dancing to it and redoing some of the numbers. Um, they would also, here again, they're doing Cleopatra. You can imagine if you were a local Brooklyn or Queens or Staten Island gal getting hired for the summer to play Cleopatra must have been a real thrill. But they would come in here, you can see a man up on the camera dolly, and he's actively filming away. I don't think they ever actually used any film for the entire pavilion. You could go on the set of Gunsmoke, very popular TV show back at this period of time. You could wander around and look at Miss Kitty's Saloon and the other places. They would then do stage shows. You can see the folks, how close you could get to the action as these two guys are getting ready to mix it up in the bar. They would then break the bottles of glass across their head, that sort of thing. Or you could get to go and meet the bar girls who were hanging around outside. Again, great thing to put on your resume that I was a bar girl at the Miss Kitty's Saloon. They'd have gunfights out in the street, shoot people down dead. Another movie they were supposedly filming here. We're going to go visit South Pacific. They had a little bit of water scene there. People singing and dancing and again redoing the numbers from the show. Inside the pavilion, they had props from a number of movies, things that would be worth a lot of money today, but back in the 60s, people didn't really think too much. Barge here from the making of the movie Cleopatra. I mentioned earlier, they had people come and put their handprints and signatures into concrete. If anybody knows who the actress is, please do let me know in the chat or later when we're talking. We've never been able to find where any of these squares of signatures have gone to after the fair. You would think somebody, someplace, would have taken them home because they did have quite a few big name stars come by to do these things, and none of them have ever showed up. So somebody, it probably has one heck of a patio somewhere. Had car you could get into it, bounce up and down. The roller in the back would make it look like you were going along at high speed. Or you could go into the restaurant, which basically was a more upscale restaurant, nice decor and well-dressed waitresses. We're going to go down the road now to the state of Illinois. I hope I'm not going too fast, but I had a lot to cover. Won't go a lot into Illinois because I've already talked about it on the Disney and the World's Fair talk, but this was a major pavilion, tremendous attraction for the fair. Didn't open on time. You can see first week of the fair, it's roped off. You can't go in. That's because Mr. Lincoln was throwing robotic fits and not letting people be entertained just yet. So it got them going about a week later, and folks were able to go in. On the way, you pass this large statue of Abraham Lincoln. You might notice that he has a rather shiny nose, and the reason is people decided it was a good luck charm to come by and rub Abe's nose for good luck. So over the period of time, his nose got brighter and shinier as the fair went on. The bust has been redone. It's in a museum now, and I don't think they encourage people to rub his nose for luck anymore. Very nice statue of him on horseback, reading his law book as he was on his way to town. Again, most of these things were commissioned for the fair and have been located to other places, many of them in the state of Illinois now. Pictures of Mr. Lincoln at the fair are very, very hard to find. They made a big thing about don't use flash photography. And back in 1964, for the most part, people obeyed and they didn't do it. So you end up with very grainy pictures of Mr. Lincoln, very dark pictures of Mr. Lincoln. And even Disney has very, very few pictures of Mr. Lincoln at the fair because, as I mentioned in a prior talk, each division of Disney thought somebody else was taking those pictures and saving them. So when you do see a nice picture of Mr. Lincoln, this actually is at a Disneyland. The dome behind him was built for Disneyland. This past week, somebody was showing pictures on Facebook. He actually has the dome that was built for the '64 World's Fair that they did not, Disney did not bring it back out to California because they built this duplicate because there were Lincoln in both coasts for a while. And next week or 2 weeks from now, when I'm talking about the building and demolition of the fair, we'll be taking a look at how that dome from the '64 fair looks today. Back, they had a number of shops, basically things, historical things from Lincoln's life, Or out back, they had a display about Illinois and the great industrial stuff today. They had this large tire as part of the display from Caterpillar tractor. The state had to get a special waiver from the General Tire, the General Rubber people with their giant Ferris wheel, because they had the exclusive rights to giant tires, and the lawyers got involved trying to figure out, was this a big tire or a giant tire? And they finally ended up giving him an exception that they could put this tire on display. Right across from that, we have the Long Island, where I'm from. Anybody else from Long Island, wave your hands. It was sponsored in large part by the Long Island Railroad. They had a miniature train that went around. They also had a model railroad inside the pavilion. This young kid is being fascinated not by the trains, but by something else Long Island was famous for many years ago. We were famous for potatoes and for ducks. So out in Suffolk County was duck farm after duck farm after duck farm. And you could come and see all these little ducks in their incubators. And I don't think they let anybody take ducks home, but they did have duck parades and other things that were to promote the agricultural thing, which was still a thing on Long Island at that time. Long Island has two counties, Nassau County, Suffolk County. There were displays about the governments for each, the major things that were being done. Interesting thing here, they had a model railroad that went around, and the big thing for me, I had a Lionel set. The Long Island Railroad had a model train set, but it was American Flyers, and they had been hand painted to look like Long Island Railroad cars. My college roommate's father was the vice president of passenger operations for the Long Island Railroad, and his name is on all the tickets. If you ever see a ticket from the 60s or 70s, Harold M. Troop. After the fair ended, they asked who wanted the railroad. Bill's father took it. He would put it up every year at Christmas time and run it around the tree and that. Bill joined the Army, came back one time from deployment in Germany, asked his mother where the train set was, and she said, oh, we got rid of that. It was taking up space. Luckily, another friend now, by the coincidence, had got it through a yard sale, and so parts of it have survived. They also had a real live locomotive that they cut the engines out, brought it out here to the fair. You could go and get your picture taken as an engineer. This is now in Oyster Bay, being restored at Oyster Bay Railroad Museum out there, so there's a World's Fair legacy left. They also had the back of another train, which was a observation car. And I never remember observation cars running on the Long Island Railroad, but evidently they did. Both the engine and the observation car had gone to a daycare center. That when the daycare center shut down, the engine was moved, but this car was too far gone and doesn't survive anymore. The big thing by far, though, that people remember this for was the miniature train that would go around. You could get your trip on the Long Island Railroad. As you can see, it's proclaimed as your steel thruway to the fair gateway. And it was really popular, kids of all ages. It still runs today out in Suffolk County, out on Long Island. But the guys are having a great time taking their trip around. Here you have the miniature train passing the real life train. Again, for train buffs, the Long Island Railroad up above with double-decker cars in the back there. Again, this was the one that the OSHA folks would just really have a heart attack about. This gal's going around taking a trip on the train. Unfortunately, the railroad did have a major mishap during the fair. They managed to take a turn at too high a speed, derail the train, and cause a number of accidents. Luckily, nobody's sitting on it when they did it, but they then were told you needed to pay more attention to safety or we're not going to let you run your railroad. And you can imagine not great publicity for a railroad throwing a bunch of kids off onto the ground. But the Long Island Railroad was the big railroad that I would use to take the train in. They had the rail station here where you would come in and go to other parts of the. You could take a train out to Long Island, a train into Manhattan. These are folks at Shea Stadium in the background there. But this platform is still there. It doesn't get used much anymore, but it's still a legacy. Going to go down to the state of Maryland. Most of the states here, again, were here for tourism. They had a little bit about their industrial capacity, but it was really a lot about their history, their tourism, and why you should come to visit. As you walked in, there was this giant model of the USS Constellation. You can see the blue and white thing behind it was asking people to come and to donate money to it. A lot of people decided they would just throw the money into the fountain, or let's try to bounce it off the ship. So I've got shots of the guy would come out once a day with a big net to try to clean out the lagoon. And inside, two things about here. Again, they had all these little snack bars all over. So you had fried clams from the Chesapeake Bay. But we all know about the serpentine phone booths that were so different. There were a few odd and all different phone booths that were scattered around the fairgrounds. And they just show up, where you couldn't stick a regular phone booth, the Clark Kent type phone booth, the serpentine type phone booths, or the other modern phone booths scattered around. So for us phone freaks, it was fun to see where these things are scattered. They had displays of history, so they had a real live old locomotive on display there. They had different things about, you can see in the back about shipping, big ports, and how if you brought stuff into Maryland, it could reach the rest of the nation. A big part of it was come out and have some seafood. So come here, they had the 13-star flag hanging above it the whole time. But you could come out here and get fresh seafood brought up there daily from Maryland up to the fairgrounds. Right near the end of the fairgrounds, end of the fair in October '65, they almost burned the pavilion to the ground. The kitchen caught on fire, and the World's Fair Fire Department had to respond and put the fire out. And it was, I think, about the only big fire that they had to deal with during the time of the fair. Other than that, I've got a shot of one of the Greyhound escorters burning frantically, and another one of a trash can. So that they did keep busy. But again, they almost burned the pavilion down, so they were glad to be able to save it. State of Minnesota came by. They said, we're going to have a big pavilion. Again, get people to come out here and go visit us. For those of us that work on Rose Parade floats, I got a kick out of this because their state seal they had done out of seeds and other material from the state. And they really went out in 1964 for the tourism side. So there's a booth here you can see, fish for trout. And you could really do it. They would rent you a fishing pole. They had a little pond and that little blue and white striped area behind the booth, and you could come in and fish for trout. And we were talking about this in a Disneyland group. You used to be able to fish for trout or catfish, I guess, rather, at Disneyland in the rivers of America. But you can imagine going into the World's Fair, getting your fishing pole for 50 cents, getting a trout, and now it's 10 o'clock in the morning. And what do you do with that trout for the rest of the day? I would defy that any of those trouts ever made it home and ever made it on anybody's dinner plate. And I'm sure they ended up in a lot of trash cans. But you could come and fish for trout, or you could go for a thrilling canoe ride, which they had tried to make it as hard as possible for anybody to tip over because they didn't want anybody drowning. All this thing, I think, was about 6 inches deep. So it's very narrow. You had your challenge to get your canoe around the turn, but you could go canoeing at the '64 World's Fair. I don't remember if the canoes were back. The trout was not back in '65, and I don't remember if the canoes were or not. Inside, again, displays of why you would want to come there, why you want to invest there, why you want to shop there, build there, whatever. The pavilion did not do well in 1964, and there was tremendous talk about closing it down because they were not getting the foot traffic that they wanted. So they went to a whole new concept for 1965. There's a group of people that believe that the Vikings landed in Minnesota and left this rune stone, carved stone there, and that it was a big thing from the Vikings. Now, I don't know how the Vikings ended up sailing to Minnesota. It's not high in my list of places I could figure out how they could get to, but they built this Viking ship. They brought it on truck across from Minnesota to New York to get publicity. They had it in Manhattan for a while. And they also brought this fellow named Big Ole, and he's Minnesota, the birthplace of America, with a question mark. Because again, some people absolutely believe in it and other people scoff at it. I was talking to my friend the other day, Bigfoot, about how people believe in silly things. One thing that it's a big kick I get a kick out of here is look at Big Ole here. He's got his sword. Well, now he doesn't have a sword because somebody in New York decided, and Joey, I hope you had an alibi for this one, somebody decided they would break his sword off and take it home. But Big Ole was real popular. In the left side, you see another big figure, again, Candy Johnson up on the roof there of the Bourbon Street. Big Ole is a survivor, and he's in Minnesota today, and you can go visit him as a World's Fair legacy. Going down, again, continuing alphabetically, we get to the state of Missouri with a Mercury capsule replica out front. Space Age was really popular. Anything, if you could have a Mercury capsule, people would come and look at it this was a total replica, never flew in space, never did anything, but there was almost always a line for people to look inside and see how small it was for the astronauts to fit in there. Inside the pavilion, again, like many of the others, they had some stuff about history, how they had been a big commercial traffic area, people going up the river. But they were very proud of the fact that they had been big in aerospace for years. So you had this replica of the Spirit of St. Louis that Lindbergh flew across the ocean. They also had replicas of rocket engines, and they knew up and coming Gemini spaceship had not flown yet, but they're showing how a man's going to be able to open up the hatch and take a spacewalk, which was, wow, it's just astronomical, the concept of not only going up in space, but being able to go outside your spaceship. Out back was the Missouri snack bar, and it was interesting that this snack bar is very visible from the transportation area right across the highway, and it became one of my favorite go-to spots because for whatever reason, it wasn't never particularly busy. If you wanted something other than a hot dog or a hamburger at the brass rails, they had a buffet that you could come down here and get your food. And I could never figure out why it wasn't popular, because the food was good. It wasn't super overpriced, but it was one of those things I never told anybody about back then because it was, you know, a secret, and I was going to keep eating there. The state of Montana was, again, big thing for tourism at that time. They built this whole wooden facade, stockade out there of trying to come in, and they actually brought their pavilion in on train cars. I'll show you some of that in a second. They had displays outside, a guy doing rope trips. The Indians came out and danced, and if you look behind them, you can see blue over the word Montana. Those are actually pieces of train cars. They built their whole displays on trains, took it across the United States to try to build up interest. They, during the fair, they had somehow managed to commit themselves to be someplace else for some period of time. So for a 2-week window, they took the train cars back out of there, did whatever show that they're supposed to do, and then they brought the train cars back. In the meanwhile, they had the wooden buildings they had built to do it. And some of the train cars still exist. They're back in Montana today. You could come and ride a horse. This horse happened to be stuffed, so he never threw a rider. They also had a stuffed buffalo, and you can notice he's built in a little golf cart. And they would drive him around the fairgrounds and try to convince people like the Pied Piper to come back and visit them at the state of Montana. They also had some live animals brought in for the fair. You can get a postcard telling you how you get your Montana Hereford cattle and get them full of pep feeds. I don't know how many feeds they sold to people, but they were an attraction there. And again, you can see again more here. The train car roofs are just peeking up behind the facade there. New England states was an interesting one. Each of these states did not want to spend the money to build their own pavilion, their own amount of expenses for it. So I went with this concept of all these small buildings still around a village green. I get a kick here, the little guy in his stroller, he's enjoying himself. But these buildings were all done so each state got a same amount of space. And inside they would have displays about the history of their state, the government, the products, the things that were done in there. Again, a nighttime view, you can see some looking inside them. Things that were of historical nature there. This was kind of interesting, gun display. Guy was coming to bring some additional guns to put on display at the pavilion. I think he had a rifle and a pistol. He got to the main gate and they asked him what was in the bag. Well, it turned out when they told him that he was bringing guns there, he was also there the same day that President Johnson was visiting the World's Fair. And it got quite a bit of news stories about if you're going to go to the World's Fair and carry guns, do not do it the day the president is visiting the World's Fair. Out back, they had, again, a village green. They had all sorts of fashion shows. You could come in. They had choral groups singing here. They had the latest in wedding displays. I don't think anybody actually got married. They were just there for a photo op. They also had a village store inside, which is kind of neat. The Dunphy family had their store, this wooden Indian, and inside all sorts of stuff. And they still operate store today up in New England, but you could go and get sassafras and all sorts of things you didn't get in the average store. I think you could buy a can of baked beans and walk around the fair with it. This is one I got a kick out of. We have different mascots, and we saw last week we had the Disney characters running around. Well, here you had a mountain that was out dancing. And it also, besides walking around, had copies of brochures you could walk up and take off the mountain. And they actually had a guy out there demonstrating skiing. And he would go down to the bottom of the slope. And I've got pictures on his hands and knees crawling back up because they didn't have any sort of lift to get him up there. But again, trying to convince people, come up here for the tourism, the winter, come up the snow and some of the other places up there and enjoy it. We get to New Jersey, very interesting pavilion with these different tent-like structures held by these poles. We'll talk more about the mishap they had building them during the fair in 2 weeks. But then they had, you walk in, you had things about the state, the history, that sort of thing. I think this one was here about the environmental things the state was doing to try to improve. But it was a very nice pavilion. It was very open aired, a very relaxed sort of pavilion. You can also get a view here of how different it looks from the daytime to the nighttime once the whole thing's lit up at night. But in the center was a large area of performances. I think this is where Johnny Pirro did his band performances. Lots of things with groups coming in, doing things up on the stage and being seen. Again, more displays about art in New Jersey, history of things in New Jersey, the John Bull Railroad, antique cars. I think this was a Mercer automobile built in the state of New Jersey. And they were very, very proud of Telstar, the fact that it's a product of New Jersey, the sign telling you about it. And Telstar, again, big thing we take for granted today, satellite communications. There were actually 3 different Telstars. Bell System had one on display because they designed it. New Jersey had it on display because they built it. And NASA had one on display because they launched it. So if you had any connection to Telstar, you promoted it at the fair. They also had a booth out back where they had touting New Jersey as a manufacturing facility. So this machine in the back made metal trays, and you can see some of them off to the left where they had Lincoln. They did do Lincoln, but they had Kennedy. You can see over to the left, Pope, a metal tray here, and then down off to the right, you just had others with the Unisphere, things like that. So you could actually walk in there, they'd feed a metal thing in here, stamp it out, and you could spend it again for the price of $1, walk out with a souvenir made right in front of your eyes through New Jersey manufacturing technology. They also had a very nice brass rail restaurant, not the traditional bubble shaped dome. Brass rail did operate some nicer restaurants around the fairgrounds. And I thought this was a particularly nice one with the lights and the trees and not, again, a lot of hustle and bustle out there. Again, for whatever reason, this did not get a lot of business. It was another well-kept secret. We're going to go down the road to New Mexico. They were very big doing Indian dances outside, free shows that they did several times a day, and they got good-sized crowds for it, people coming out to watch. And they had displays inside. You had a restaurant, you had a trading post. They had something for everybody. So the Indian families would come out, talk to you. You could go inside. They would entertain in the restaurant during your show. They would come and perform. They had a display here. This particular building was more about the tourism side of things, what you could come out, why you could go to New Mexico. I got a kick here. Please do not touch. So they had the Indian here, and of course this guy has to come and touch it. And everybody can talk about, oh, the youth of America, they have no respect for anything. They'll just touch anything. They'll ignore anything. Well, so will the youth mothers of America. So they kept putting bigger and bigger signs, do not touch. And I think that it just encouraged people, oh, it's just me. I'll be the exception to the rule. Inside, you could go and get all sorts of different type of items from the trading post. Little tom-toms that are stacked up here to the right. You could get rock figures, little totem poles, all sorts of odds and ends. We're taking a look over now to New York City. This was a building built for the 1939 World's Fair. It was also the New York City Pavilion for that period of time. In between the fairs, it was used for the first home of the United Nations. It was also used as a giant skating rink, and they repurposed it for the 64 World's Fair with two major things. One was the ice show, Dick Button's Ice Stravaganza. Dick Buttons being a very famous skater back at the time. And we see a bunch of people here getting ready for a show. And inside, we have a look at the show. You could go and watch the thrills of a ice skating chimp and other performances. The show was a tremendous flop. I have pictures I posted a couple weeks ago showing almost totally empty audience area. Because again, why would you go to this show? You could see the ice capades every year when it came to New York, but you could only see the World's Fair, for the 2 years it was going to be there. So rather than having to buy tickets to go to the World's Fair, buy tickets to go to the Ice Capades or the Ice Stravaganza, wait online, see the show, take an hour to 2 hours out of your day, you could go see the free shows that were going to be gone in 2 years. So the Dick Buttons Ice Stravaganza was a very quickly closed show. And as a result, they at first just covered the sign over. You can see the black squares up there saying nothing, where it used to say Dick Buttons. And down below, a big long line for the other part of the show, the other part of the pavilion was a simulated helicopter ride about a giant panorama of New York City. So it wasn't just Manhattan, it was all the boroughs. They built replicas using tax maps and photographs of all the buildings across New York. So you could take this helicopter ride with Lowell Thomas describing what you were seeing. They had simulated aircraft flying in and out of the airports. It was really a spectacular show. It's still in the Queens Museum today, been updated several times since then, but these are views back from '64. They also had some history displays, again, a model of this locomotive. They had a few different things, not a locomotive, a fire engine. They did have different things about how transit and other systems worked around, but most of these displays are just things you saw while you were waiting to get onto the helicopter ride. Outside, they had this very colorful item here, which you look at and you try to figure out what is it. And it's a section of the cable from the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, showing you how it was built. The bridge had just opened during this period of time. This piece of cable is still in existence. It's at the end of one of the bridge spans, but it's no longer as colorful as it was at the day of the fair. Again, nice pavilion still there today. Is now the home of the Queens Museum. Encourage people to go there and see the panorama. Then we're going to get to one of our favorite pavilions, or at least one of my favorite pavilions, the New York State Pavilion. Familiar to all of us that go to the fairgrounds, familiar to many of the people that go and have painted it, and familiar to people from the movie Men in Black, asking why on earth would they put a World's Fair in Queens, was to put spaceships up at the top of those towers. So giant pavilion, Governor Rockefeller, Nelson Rockefeller, for those that remember when he was the governor, was determined to have the biggest and best pavilion of any of the states at the fair, and he's very much succeeded. He was also determined to have the tallest pavilion at the fair, and for that he succeeded. And it had several components to it. The one in the center, it's not round, it's actually oval, the Tent of Tomorrow, styled as a state fair of the future. You had the New York State Observation Towers, and then Theaterama we'll see. So again, overall view looking here at the outside of the Tent of Tomorrow, giant multicolored plastic roof up there. And folks might not have realized it, but the red and white stripes back in '64 were not painted on. They were fabric strips. There was there was just cinder block walls. They had these metal pipes that ran around it with these panels of colors that were stretched on it. So all the work that the folks are doing today painting it, they're doing a lot more work than they did back then to do it. But if you put fabric panels out there today, they wouldn't last very long. So I think the paint is something well done. But this was something people were really surprised to realize, that the pavilion was done in fabric. Going to take a walk inside the Tent of Tomorrow. You had the New York State seal hanging overhead. And again, the roof is a spectacular structure. Giant plastic dome in the center to keep the rain from coming into the tent area. And it did pretty well, except when it was windy. but you had a tremendous amount of space inside. And 2 weeks when I go through how this thing was built, we'll get a real show of how the whole roof was lifted up on giant hydraulic jacks. But down below, you had the Texaco map. We'll take more of a look at that. You had a mezzanine levels of displays, and in the mezzanine, in the building that went around, you had the world of fashion, art in New York State, a number of different exhibits that were done. So again, in the center, you had all sorts of different performances. They put out a daily schedule in these great little blue sheets, who's appearing, what's doing. They brought people in, not just from New York State, but some other times, different states brought people in to entertain if they didn't have their own pavilion or if they didn't have the proper performance sort of thing. So if you were from the state of Minnesota, there was no place for you to perform. You'd come over to the state of New York. They were happy to fill you in with a slot. So we had every sort of performance you had there. You had this men's choral group, you had the cheerleaders, you had all sorts of folk groups that were doing dance acts. You had, again, in this particular case, there was no place for these people to perform but the state of Florida. So we're getting to see the Cocoa High School Band from Florida entertaining here in New York State. And it was very well received. You can look at how many people were just glad to come because this is a chance to see your kid performing at the World's Fair. You know, your kid singing, dancing, doing magic tricks, whatever you wanted to do out there. So there was always something going on. Very, very popular for the shows. Again, we had, symphony bands and orchestras trying to perform, folk groups of all sorts of types. And as time went on, we got more of, something Robert Moses didn't like. We had rock music. So they started bringing these bands in. I mentioned last week, he would not let them perform at the Singer Bowl. It could have been a huge success for bringing people in at night for musical groups. New York State was not as fussy as he was, so they had quite a few of these different groups coming in and performing here at the New York State Pavilion. And as mostly in '65, they really stepped up, and there were quite a few garage bands, people that were not famous by any stretch, but were having their time performing. So different groups, different time. You can see the teenagers out there. He's really cool. He's got his feathered hat, and he's just checking it out from the mezzanine level. And up on the mezzanine, they had all sorts of different displays. Sterling Gardens in Tuxedo, New York, had big floral gardens and some recreations of it up there. You could also see antique fire trucks, antique cars that were from New York State. This was a little ride that went around and around and around, and you got a little certificate saying you were a safe driver for the state of New York. You could also see displays on how the New York State Controller's Office collected your taxes and just doled them out. How the highways were designed and built. There was a whole set of different things up on the mezzanine. 1965, American Airlines decided to do an art show up there as well and had some very strange pieces of metallic artwork. And you had a glider. You can tell that this is 1964 because the glider number says 1964. They repainted it in 1965. But in the Finger Lakes area, Glenn Curtiss Aviation had been big in gliders, and they were able to put their glider there. Just this past week, somebody was talking about how much he enjoyed dinner up at the top in the revolving restaurant at the New York State Pavilion. And I think Jim and some others are trying to caution on that. No, there was just some vending machines up there. You actually had the 62 county room because there's 62 counties in New York. You walked in, you got your food, and you brought it out to the tables that sat outside. Or you went to the vending machines or just glowing through the trees back there. You could go and either get snacks out of the machines or get food out of the restaurant, but there was no revolving restaurant. Down below, big thing, so many of us think about finally, the Texaco map, the largest map ever created, done from a Texaco road map. So they had pictures of where all the Texaco stations were, major roads and other attractions. Very big particular area. You can go and look at the map and see at different times whether it was 1964 or 65, because some towns they left off in 64, they added back for 65. If you look at this one, for example, I can tell this is 1965 because if you look between Freeport and Rockville Center, there is the town of Baldwin, which was one of the most important towns in the Long Island because that's where I lived. And it wasn't there in 64, and people in Baldwin all wrote and screamed and protest. Why were we left off? We're just as important as Freeport or Rockville Center. The real reason is that Freeport is a city, Rockville Center is a city. Baldwin is part of the town of Hempstead, which is above it. So for 64, they had put down places that had their own individual governments. In 65, they came back and added a lot of population centers to it. So amazing that they actually took the time to take huge sections of this map out, update them, and put them back in. Again, big map, covered what's left of it kind of on the gravel today. We'll get more into that in 2 weeks from now. But again, I was just asked to help somebody in England doing a presentation on terrazzo tile and what you can do with it. Amazing amount of work it took to put this thing together. And again, this is 64 because poor Baldwin's not on it. The towers, of course, we've all gotten to know. There were 3 of them. You had the 2 higher ones, the observation towers, the lower one, the VIP tower. Someday I'll hope to find some good pictures of the observation lounge, but they must have had a don't take pictures rule that people obeyed or whatever, because it doesn't show up. But this is a shot of looking down from one of the towers, and a lot of people don't realize that the towers are actually held by these cables. They're not up at the very top is the supporting structure. The decks are held by these cables, and they're not bolted to the individual concrete towers. They're held up from above. So I'm hoping that the guys that sold the steel in 1964 sold them nothing but the best. And you could see that they were very popular. People went up there. They got a tremendous view from up there. You had the little binoculars, which they had to chain down so people didn't tip them over the edge. But the second level was hardly ever used. There were some vending machines up there, which they took out over time because they had nobody using them. And it's very rare. I have this picture of these folks on this particular tower. And I think of all the tower pictures out of the towers, I think I have 2 or maybe 3 that show people on that particular level. So for whatever reason, the elevators didn't stop there. They didn't let people go there. It was why they built it and then decided not to use it. One of those mysteries for the future. VIP level was enclosed. It was air conditioned. They did not have a restaurant. They had a small snack bar that they would mostly serve alcohol to guests, but they could bring food up there and heat it up, but they could not actually have a real cooking sort of operation up there. And up at the top, you can see how low the railings were. Back when they built the Space Needle in Seattle, they had low railings. Today, they would have to step it up and make it much safer for everybody. But man, what a view you got from up there. You can see the little girl's dress is blowing. It was very windy up there a lot of the time. But it was a great avenue for sightseeing. The stairs between the 2 levels, hopefully when they do finish refurbishing the towers, we have a chance to go up and do it again. As I mentioned, the wind is pretty nasty up there at times. The sign between the 2 people is warning that if you spit or throw objects, you can be ejected from the fair. And I get a kick out of this picture. Mentioned it on a prior talk. You wonder what she's thinking, and is she trying to see her car in the parking lot, or is she looking at some pavilion trying to go there? And this is the highest point of the fair. As I mentioned, Robert Moses and Nelson Rockefeller worked together to make sure that the New York State got the biggest thing, and they had this weather station that would go and tell you how it was up there, and then how the winds were blowing and that. Okay, and then down below, Theaterama, Theater in the Round. They showed a movie at that point in time, a 360-degree movie about life in New York State, big travel film, and they also commissioned modern artwork to go around the pavilion and hung up on the walls. This picture is interesting. You see a giant silver screen over to the right. That was originally done by Andy Warhol, the New York's Most Wanted. It was a bunch of mugshots. The Italian American community protested because it made it look like all Italian American members were members of the mafia. Robert Moses said, take it down. Warhol refused to take it down. Instead, he painted it over with silver paint as a protest. I've always wondered when the fair ended, if anybody ever took it down and took the silver paint back off and has a giant Warhol worth zillions of dollars, or if it just got dumped into a dumpster someplace. But again, Roy Lichtenstein art, I won't try to go through each of the pieces, but they were, some of the pieces are very hard to find pictures of because they were blocked by other items or people didn't think to take pictures. So I've actually helped about 4 of the different artists or their museums with pictures of the artworks as they were installed at the fair. Some of the things like Eat has been restored and is up on the roof of a building now. Different pieces have been saved. Some exist only in pictures these days. State of Oklahoma, they had the big state seal here, New York, the U.S. Pavilion behind it. Their big thing was this giant 3D diorama out there, a three-dimensional map. You would take these telephones, listen to things that were in front of you, telling what was going on. And what was interesting was that the figures actually moves. These cattle would go in a circle in and out of the stockyards. They had boats that would move in lakes, little things that would be motorized and entertain you. This was, I tried to figure out, this woman heard Joey was coming to town, so she was going to take the state seal before he could take it home. But between the seasons, what do they do with a state giant thing like this? Leave it out there in the snow? No, they actually covered it up, protected it. This is representatives from the Oklahoma government coming to the World's Fair between seasons. And I thought people might get a kick out of this because we don't see a lot of the fairground between seasons and in snow. They were out there looking at it and trying to figure out some new displays and some different things to add between seasons. And it's kind of fun as they're going around looking at everything. A giant snowball fight broke out and they were having a great time. 65 saw the addition of the Pennsylvania exhibit, not a pavilion. It wasn't big enough, but it was an exhibit with a replica of the Liberty Bell. The company had made replicas of the Liberty Bell and sent it to every one of the states. You could come out here, and if you worked on it for the Boy Scouts, you got to let people ring the bell. I can tell you from experience that after an hour of it, you never wanted to hear that bell again for the rest of your life. And some people could ring it very, very loud. The Unisphere is part of the federal and state area. Not going to cover that a lot because we all know the Unisphere pretty well. Just a quick couple of shots of it. In its heyday with its bright blue base, which hopefully they'll let the paint crew paint blue again someday, not black as it exists. But for people that don't know how it looked when the fountains were full, the water went all the way up to the base. It was quite deep. The fountains were quite impressive. It hasn't been this way since the fair for liability reasons. But I got a kick out of this one with all the high-tech stuff going on at the fair around. You know, kids just love playing with water. So I think some of them might have been reaching in to try to get some quarters off the bottom. But I've got a whole bunch of pictures of kids just playing around with the fountains at the fair. United States Pavilion almost didn't come to be. Lots of politics. I'll talk about that more when we get to the building of the fair. But it was one of the more impressive pavilions, both in its size and also its construction methodology. Again, massive pavilion. They had saved the spot for the U.S. Pavilion, and Moses kept keeping it on the maps, even though for a while the federal government was refusing to pay for it. Finally, the president got behind it. They agreed to do it, and it was a massive building. Was it kind of interesting? Early shot here. If you look really close, you can see it was the United States Pavilion. They didn't really think that maybe they should put their name on it, that you would want to attract anybody and tell you what was inside. So they had these tiny little letters. They decided to put big ones on. They're still held up here with masking tape because the glue wasn't quite dry yet, getting them in there. If you go to my site, you can see a thing about the U.S. Pavilion sign, how they had to change that over time, because people kept posing for pictures, knocking the lights off, and finally that was one of your duties as the Boy Scouts to tell people don't climb over the little sign, or the little railing and hurt the sign. But again, picture from New York State Pavilion, massive pavilion there at the end of the court. It was very impressive. At night, you had these plastic panels, Calwell plastic. They were both transparent, lit from inside, but also spotlights from down below. So it was very, very nice to see. Down below, underneath it, you could get a bunch of performances. So you had military bands performing. Again, you could have different folk groups. They set up temporary stages. Fife and drum chorus, people would come in and entertain. The major thing was to go up this incredibly long flight of stairs. There was an elevator inside of one of the 4 legs that held the building up for the people that needed some handicap access. But you would go upstairs to get to this giant courtyard, and you would go in and see Challenge to Greatness. There was a movie. There were also other still displays. We'll take a look at those. So we're going inside that a whole big thing then about what made America great. This is the big thing going on with civil rights. We're getting a big interest in the country. So the displays about how we have challenges because of social concern. We also have the fact that we're generating more and more trash. So these columns on in 1880, this is how much trash the average person donated, or not donated, generated by 1900. And then the one on the far right is showing every year how much every one of us is responsible for generating that much trash. Different displays about American culture, dancing, the diversity that made up the country and contributed to it. You could go into this giant library. You could do a dial-up book, and it was in the back. You could dial it, and you could get somebody doing audio books reading them to you. They also had a computer system. You could put a date in, get information out. I think it was a Sperry Univac system. But the major thing was this ride system. You would get in these giant bleachers, and they were motorized. You can see the third rail over to the right that provided power. So, today you could go and take things, Disney got big things for the Energy Pavilion, and that was moving bleachers. Well, they had this back in '64. They had a movie Ray Bradbury helped contribute to writing the script. And it was a very interactive movie. In this one particular scene, you can see 4 different movie screens. There were sensors along the ground that as you got to different parts of the ride, it would trigger certain mechanisms. In cases, it would lift up curtains. Like here, you don't see the screens coming in front of you, but it would cue the music. It would get the film running, and you would get different scenes of life in America out in the countryside. They had things of cities. It was a very interesting film experience that one you can see today, because I think it was about 40 different screens in there, and no way really to replicate the experience today. Hall of Presidents, people think about, of course, today with Disney and the president standing up and talking. This was an addition that they put in to try to get more people, something to do, because the lines were so long for the ride. The Hall of Presidents at the U.S. Pavilion was quite different than Disney's. It was more displays about the president's early car figure, Abraham Lincoln. They had a display of Eisenhower, his jacket, some of the medals he wore. So it was all displays about the presidents, but no audio animatronic performances of any of them. Down below, they had a bust of Kennedy, who had been assassinated, after he had done the groundbreaking of the fair, but before it opened. And they would come out and put flowers on it to commemorate his birthday and memory of when he was assassinated. State of West Virginia, getting near the end here. The state of West Virginia had a thing that was very big about tourism, but they also had, come down here, we have this glassware that you can buy, Pilgrim glass. Very, very nice glasswork that they had done, all sorts of displays. You could actually buy this and take it home, or what my mother did, get a catalog, order it, and have it delivered, and that way she didn't have to worry about us dropping it during the time we were at the fair. They also had a thing where you could come and enter to win this home. You were going to get a mountaintop in the state and this house built. If anybody has any information, anybody actually won this house, please do let me know, because I've written to the state, asked them who got it, because I'm trying to see if it still exists. They said they couldn't find any records of who won it. I've not been able to find any things on newspaper archives or anything. So if anybody has this World's Fair souvenir house in a mountaintop, please let us know. Westinghouse, mentioned they're in the state area because this was the industrial area for the 39 fair. They had their time capsule that they buried then, and they wanted to do another time capsule. So they built it. This is a replica of the, actually, I don't remember if this was a replica. This was the real one hanging up there that was going to go down below. They had a display showing what was in the 38 time capsule. They would describe, you can see different rolls of film and everything. And then they had this marker over where the 39 capsule was. Through the compression of a zoom lens, the General Motors is in the background. You don't actually realize the highway inside. But this is over the exact marking of the 39 capsule. The 64 capsule, these were all things that were going to go in it. Some of them were shrunk down, like obviously it wasn't big enough to fit the Atlas or some of these other things, but they crammed them in there. And this kind of shows you how the 64 capsule is not under that granite marker that's in the park today. So they drill another hole. They are just getting ready to drop this thing down in there, but you can get an idea of just how far off from where the marker is today in the park and where the actual 64 capsule is. The book of records that they distributed for the 39 World's Fair, where the capsule is located and how to find it, they did an update reminding people that the other one's about 6 feet away. And this was the day that it would drop down in there. And after this, it's sealed off for the next 5,000 years. Wisconsin had a very popular pavilion. You can see the world's largest cheese. Again, looking down from New York State, the gold building in the center was picked up and sold after the fair. It's a radio station now in Wisconsin. The big shed building is actually used at a summer camp and used to cover their dining area. You had a neat little slide. You could come down and take a farm type experience running down the chute of burlap. You could go to Tad's Steakhouse, and I'm so disappointed. The last Tad's closed in New York. Tad's was a great spot. When we went to the fair with my dad, he would take us to Tad's. We would go into Manhattan. He would take us to Tad's. It was a great way to get a steak dinner, a baked potato, and a piece of cheese toast for a great price. So sorry that they're gone. Or you could also go see the world's largest cheese, 17¼ tons. So we're walking in here to go see it. They it's very hard to get a picture of it because it was under the roof there. But in the back, you could see the customized trailer that they made, air conditioned thing to keep the cheese cool and keep it from spoiling during the fair. And there's a postcard view of the man and woman behind the world's largest cheese, all 34,591 pounds of it. I'm out of breath. So I got them all in. I have to see how, oh, Joe, you have a piece of track from the ride. Okay, I didn't doubt it. So that's a look at the federal and state area. As I said, a very popular section of the fair. And I'll try to look through here the chats. I see there's a whole bunch of them. But if anybody has anything you'd like to add or anything, just wave or raise your hand, and I'll be glad to try to unmute you. Somehow, let's see, view, gallery view. Okay, anybody wait? Okay, Dave, okay, asked to unmute. Dave, you should, there you go.
So I arrived on the scene at Disney after Lincoln had been installed at Disneyland, but I was working on that attraction, and just kind of an interesting or maybe surprising story. So having Lincoln stand up turns out to be pretty tricky, because when a person stands up, they bend at the waist, and in any case, so it's tricky. And if it's not done in the right order, then like the chair that Lincoln sets in is a breakaway chair, because if his waist doesn't bend and his legs stand up, his back goes through the chair. So one of my jobs was to build a fail-safe that would turn off the hydraulic system, because they didn't want to break the chairs. They were going through chairs, and it's like, okay, we got to fix this. And so I go down to Disneyland, and I notice that there's a video camera on Mr. Lincoln, because they had somebody kind of monitoring each time he would stand up. I'm talking to the guy, and I said, oh, did you ever see anything interesting? Here's the story. The hydraulic fluid is dyed red so that you can see the color. You probably know this story then. Yeah. So one day, the hydraulic fluid leaks out of his neck, and there's this red fluid shooting out. And you can imagine how the audience responded to that. So same thing with a GE show, Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. The guy's singing the song, and there's a hydraulic leak, and he's happily singing along, and meanwhile he's bleeding from the neck. So it's not like things. Of course, that got fixed, and there was a TV camera, and the guys shut it off, and all of that. But there's been some funny things that I've run into over the years, and that's one of them. So when I think of Mr. Lincoln, video camera, hydraulic leak.
Yeah. People have posted about that. I was actually there one time when Mr. Lincoln sprung a leak, but not in the figure, down below. And he was there, and all of a sudden he just started slumping over, and it was like, again, you mentioned they watched it, they monitored. Thank you, we're done. Curtain comes down. But I do remember we used to use the Disneyland Theater at Disneyland for employee film screenings, and it was equipped with a 35 and 16 millimeter film. And as a cast member, we would show the latest of the Disney movies there. But we would also periodically take something out of the vault and show historical stuff. So I went down there one day, and it's so bizarre when you open up the curtain. Sorry, my dogs are going crazy. You open up the curtain, and Lincoln is there, and you can't help walking up. So how was the show? Just
Yeah,
the various chats here. Various. I love the chimp. Yeah. Anybody else? As I'm just reading through, I try to answer some. Oh, Glenn. Okay, let's ask to unmute Glenn. There you go.
Yeah, I remember a funny story. They used to take school kids in to see Lincoln as part of a trip, and he went through one of those failures, and we got to see the letter one little boy wrote. I was sorry that Mr. Lincoln got sick. And he said, at first I thought he was bending down to tie his shoe, and then he started talking to his feet. But I brought, I'll switch this. Last week, it seemed to be some interest in more of the technical stuff, but here is where'd it go?
You trying to share something, Glenn?
Yeah, can I do that?
Yeah, well, here, let me.
I had it in my background, but it disappeared.
Yeah, let me make you a co-host, and that gives you the share capability. So you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, hang on a second here. Sorry. I only have 3 shots, so I won't bore everybody. Uh-oh. I guess I have to share it first. Share. Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Is that on?
Yeah, so we see Walt and the tape reels.
Yeah, this was the way they did it in World's Fair for the Carousel of Progress. And the machine, there was a shuttle, and there was 2 tape machines, and the one would run the show, and then it would switch over to the other one, and then it would rewind, and it would just switch back and forth, which worked okay for a show like Lincoln, where there was a pause, but it didn't work too well, or a show like Carousel of Progress, where they had a few seconds between acts. So when we went to Florida, here's an example of 35 mag machine. These are the multi-track 35 millimeter film that's synchronized to the 35 millimeter film picture that were in all of the different film shows. And then here's a row of the bin loop tape machines that used to run all of the bigger attractions like Small World and Carousel of Progress and things like that. So I thought you guys might be interested in seeing those. When I first started, I made the tapes and shipped them down there. And Rich Barnes, who I think is still on here, was the one that loaded them in and made them work.
I tell you, man, you're giving me a flashback to my early days. I mean, I don't know how many hours spent in that room, but boy, it sure looks familiar. Thanks.
Sure. Now let me how do I get back out of this?
You should be able to go back down to the bottom to stop. Up at the top right, should be a little red thing that says stop sharing.
Ah, I see it.
Oh, okay.
Never done that before.
Great. It's funny. I was when you were doing, I was looking through the thing, and we got some real good guys with a sense of humor here. They said they should have put a sign up there about don't touch. For Joey Vento, don't touch. And they said, yeah, Joey took the note home. So, and people ask what happened to the cheese. They brought the cheese back out to the pavilion when the guy bought the radio station. The pavilion built it as a radio station, and he didn't think he'd be able to get it, but he got a real good deal on it, brought it out, and he also got the truck and the cheese. And it lasted for a number of years, but I guess even if you refrigerate something, after a while it has a endpoint. So they eventually had to take the real block of cheese out, and they had a replica block of cheese, which I think is still inside the thing today. They also had a talking cow that you could some mechanism that did something, you push the button, the cow would talk to you, and I don't think that works anymore. But I've never been able to find out, did they just throw the cheese in the trash can, or was it that far gone, or did they just have a giant omelet someday to use up all the cheese? But yeah, somebody says that it was cut up in pieces sold for charity. Well, I'm glad that somebody got a piece of the cheese. Somebody else, of course, in our community said they hid the cheese. So just seeing new messages here. I read an article the other day that cheese was eaten. This really big mouse. Who else? Any other comments, memories of the state pavilions from the fair? Again, it was Jim. Get you up here.
Okay, just briefly, those signs that you saw around the tent of tomorrow that have the names of the different attractions, there was a round circular piece of artwork that had little dots on it representing the counties of New York. We recreated two of those signs, and they're hanging there now. One of them, that round thing deteriorated through the sunlight, and here's the one that is to be put in its place. But we have to wait till COVID is over and the construction is done there to go in and put this one up over the one that had been faded from the sun.
It's neat. Didn't you also have a problem that somebody stole one with your Texaco or one of the other signs?
Yeah, we had it stolen. We had a wooden one with paint, and a sign company came and donated a replacement, and they made it out of, I believe it was metal, and we actually have two of them, one hanging and one as a place in case something should happen to that one. And if we ever have any more exhibits out there and let the public come to our exhibits, we would put the spare one on display as one of the exhibits.
Great. Somebody asked me in a chat if I had any pictures of the ride vehicles for the U.S. Pavilion. And actually, I do. I have black and white pictures in a magazine. What I've done for each of these talks is I've tried to use my own pictures that don't appear in other magazines or on other people's sites. But I do have a picture of it. They were basically about 6 rows of seats, just bench seats on a giant box that then would go off into the pavilion. But I'll try to grab a picture out of and stick it on my site or in a future chat. They weren't exciting to look at. Get to you in 1 second, Dave. They weren't exciting to look at, but it was a real exciting technology that you would walk into a movie theater, sit down, and then all of a sudden the screen would lift up and you'd go off on this ride. And again, Disney did it in a more advanced way with the Energy Pavilion, where you had things with turnstiles going around or turntables going around and no track. You just basically in these giant trackless vehicles. Dave, you had something?
I just wanted to share that, first of all, a compliment that you're doing this each week, and you've kept it interesting, and you keep it interesting, and it's a whole new world for me. And many of the other people, or several of the other people on this call, as a result of last week talking about the tape machines, it spawned a whole other conversation offline with, oh yeah, who made those machines and how many tracks did they have? And so I'm talking with Rich Barnes and several of the other people that I had worked with over the years yeah, weren't those made by Broadcast Electronics? No, they were made by ITC, and we had this problem and that problem. And it's just adds some, I mean, it's been a long, long time ago, but it is very, particularly in these times, it's great to have your mind active, looking into things like that. I wanted to share back with you, and we can talk privately, but you asked me about the film To the Moon and Beyond. So I ended up talking to the producer of it this week, and it turns out that negative still exists, and I can give you the detail. It's possible if somebody wanted to spend the time and effort that the film could be restored, and you'd have to find a venue where you could show it. But it's just, these talks are, I mean, we go here, at least I come here and, oh, it's my Saturday morning, but it's what comes out of it, because it's a whole nother area. I never thought much about World's Fairs, nor did I think much about the origin of many of the shows that I worked on. And yet here's a chance to learn it, and lots of other information from people that clearly this audience knows way more about World's Fairs than I'll ever learn. But I want to thank you, Bill, for doing this, and those of us that joined the call. And I watched the chat as it's going along, and it's just like amazing. Who would have thought that this lady go-go danced faster, or did the twist faster than anybody else?
Yeah, she was really famous. Well, thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. You know, I started doing this again, you know, it's hard to believe coming up on a year, thinking, oh, I'll go a couple weeks, and, you know, you keep going. And I enjoy it because I have so much stuff just stacked in closets. You know, somebody asked me how long it takes to put together each of these, and it's about 8 to 10 hours, because, you know, you go and you say, okay, I got to find a shot of the New York State Pavilion. Oh, I have 1,800 of them. Which 12 do I show? But I enjoy the ability to share it. You know, the people that hoard things and just, you know, mine. I don't understand that mindset. And, you know, I would encourage guys like you, Dave, or Glenn, or, you know, others, that have worked on this stuff. If you guys want to get together, I mean, Glenn, I'm in seventh heaven looking at those pictures you just showed us, things like the tape machines. Because again, wow, it was when I walked in that room for the first time, that was the neatest place on the planet Earth, you know. But then again, it's the office. Who takes pictures of the office? You go home and you don't have it. So I don't have a single picture of any of the stuff at DAX or anything like that. So for me, I looked at it and go, man, I mean, I can just, when you were showing the picture, my ears were recreating the sound of everything going on in that room. And I would just love for you other wet Imagineering guys to get together and, you know, put something together another week, and then I can take the week off and just be in hog heaven with it. So let's see, Joey had his hand up. You ask you to unmute. And we all make fun of Joey. I noticed all these chats about Joey taking things home and everything like that. But hey, who among us, if he had the chance, wouldn't do the same thing, right? Okay, so what's up, Joey?
I just want to reiterate that it's a wonderful thing. I think these chats have brought many of us that can't get together together, and is a real family atmosphere. And that's kind of why we do our little gatherings in the park. But we've met so many great people on this through your shows, Bill. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing for us and for our family. What I did want to make a comment of the U.S. Pavilion. This is a piece of the track that we believe is the track of the ride, of the big ride. And we had made a little face on it because it was hanging in our yard for years. My daughter wanted to make a little robot face out of it. But when I got in there on one of my trips, I think about 1973, and Charlie Abar also saw the same thing. We saw the big ride, and it had lots of garbage in it. Someone had dumped tons and tons of debris in there, but it was still in there in 1973.
Yeah, they walked away and just left it there, and they left the display cases. You know, they actually left a lot of the signage up on the walls and everything. They just walked away and left it there. And unfortunately, that's what the vandals like to smash. You know, oh, glass display case. Let me break it into pieces. But yeah, they basically took the the carved artifacts and Eisenhower's jacket and just left everything else behind. Astonishing.
Yeah. And very, very interesting. There was a display that had rag dolls, and it was, I think, to show the population growth of the United States. And unless I was dreaming it, I remember through one of the trips, it was very, very dark. And eventually I had got a little helmet with a light on it to walk through. And I remember seeing a little rag doll on the floor, and I'm sure it was on the mezzanine level. We didn't go any higher than that because we used like even the flutter of a pigeon's wing would have us running out of there. So I do remember that though on the ground. And I didn't pick it up.
Hey, Joey, just think what you would have given for one of these little helmets, you know, and these little lights,
Oh,
you know.
we could have used a box of those.
I
Thanks,
use it
Bill.
for finding wires behind my computer. Wayne, get to you in a second. Kenneth and Baron be right with you. Before I get to it, I'd like everybody to look at Carol's picture and behind her. And Carol, would you just like to explain what the background is?
Yeah, actually, I'm a docent at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, and I used to do before the pandemic, school tours. And we stopped in front of a large painting one day, and I said to the kids, why don't you sketch something you see that you like? And one of the little girls sketched me and gave it to me. And it was the most touching thing. You see the curly hair, that was absolutely right. And she put my name on top as well. And it really touched me.
Yeah, I just saw during the talk that you had put it up there, and I thought you might like to share it.
Thank
You know,
you.
again, we're all stuck at home. We can't do the things we'd like to do, you know, going off and working at the Getty. But I thought that was a great picture when she brought it home. So I just thought, you know, people like to know the backstory behind it.
Right.
So Kenneth, I think you were thanks, Carol. Think you were next, Kenneth, if you would unmute yourself.
Yeah, just a really really short trivia question. As best as I can recollect, at the Westinghouse time capsule, there's absolutely zero indication of the location of the later time capsule. It just has like flagstone right around it with no indication something else is there. Is that true, or did I miss it?
Yeah, no, if you go there today, I'll show pictures 2 weeks from now of, you know, the fair, you know, over the years. There's no indication. It's again, it's buried a number of feet down, so I don't think they haven't marked it. Maybe they haven't marked it because they don't want people to dig up the flagstones thinking they can get to it. But they actually had to update the book of records telling people it's located X amount of degrees, you know, Y amount of feet from where it is. But yeah, most people think that granite marker is over the time capsules. It's over the 39 time capsule, which is actually the 38 time capsule because they buried it before the fair. So,
Well, it did look like if you went out, if you looked at the engraving and went to the end of the word corporation, if you went out radially from there,
yes,
you know, about 6 feet, you'd be close at least. But
exactly. So now we all know where to dig.
that's right. It's all your fault too.
Hey, I want part of the stuff to get there. We'll get to you in 1 second. We had Baron, Wayne, and then Jim. So we'll go over to Baron here real quick.
Okay. Hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good. I think you were going to comment a little bit more on the wonderful New Jersey Pavilion. You were saying something, but I thought you said something as a subset that you were going to comment on. Was that today, or was that in a
I'm going to do
following
it.
discussion?
Unfortunately, the New Jersey Pavilion had a fatal accident when they were building it. I'm just going to talk about some of the problems they had building it when one of the wires snapped and killed some of the workers. So I'll be looking at the New Jersey Pavilion going up, and then I have pictures of the New Jersey Pavilion coming down, and then the pictures of the New Jersey Pavilion coming down when it was supposed to come down. So I'll do that in about 2 weeks. Well, my
Okay.
intent is next week, I hope to do the international pavilions, the world part of World's Fair. Then I thought the following week, the World's Fair at night, because to me, that was my favorite time. Everybody else went home. The humidity machines got turned off. And again, I got tremendous number of pictures of the fair at night. And then I'll get into the building and the demolition. And after that, I don't know what I'll do. By that time, I'll have had my second shot. I'll be cured. I hope. They gave us the first shots out here in California, and then they have no plans on how to do anything else past that. So, you know, I feel like, you know, working for the LAPD, you go out, you know, looking for drug dealers. Now I have to go, hey man, you got any vaccine I can score? You know, it's a sick world. Wayne, you wanted to say something, and then we'll get to Jim.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thanks for all the participants that bring stuff that other people didn't know. And I was especially interested in the jumble bins for the audio tape at Disney. And I know somebody who did that for videotape at NBC, but many years later, and I'm sure he didn't know about what Disney was doing. But the other thing I wanted to ask is, would you like to give us a quick explanation of the connection between the Illinois Pavilion and SKF? Because maybe not everyone has heard that story.
Oh, the ball bearings, yeah. Over at SKF, again, they were a big company for making ball bearings, and they had you could get a free sample ball bearing, and which why you would want to give them out or why you'd want to take them, but the ball bearings were excellent. If you could get a ball bearing, go to a brass rail restaurant, get a straw, and then go over to the Mr. Lincoln Pavilion and shoot ball bearings at the actor playing Mr. Lincoln to try to get his attention, because people were convinced when Glenn mentioned about standing up from the chair, or Dave mentioned it, about standing from the chair and stuff, was monumental for, you had the figures over at the Carousel of Progress and they all stayed talking or whatever, but this guy actually stood up, and there were people who were 100% convinced it was a real live actor. So people would take the ball bearings, go over there and shoot it, and Disney would have to start picking ball bearings out of Mr. Lincoln's face. And every now and then they would get into part of the mechanism and everything. So Disney had to ask the guys at SKF, could you please not give out, handfuls of ball bearings to people? So it, again, the law of unintended consequences. I mean, even if Lincoln wasn't there, he just thought ball bearings, shooting them at people was a bad thing. So I don't know how long the ball bearing free samples lasted, but I don't think it went on for a significant period of time. Jim, you had something?
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to clarify that I read somewhere that it's 10 feet from the center point of the time capsule marker. And like the other fellow said, on a radial axis of the N in the lettering, coming out 10 feet, exactly 10 feet. That's
Okay,
it.
10 feet. I got a shovel. Let's go.
In fact, we were thinking of just, not that we can actually put anything there, but we were thinking of just scraping the flagstone a little there, doing something there just to kind of mark it, where at least we could tell people, look for this mark on the slate.
Yeah, you could put a little mark, COVID vaccine here, and people would dig up the capsule for you. Anyone else? Any other thoughts and memories of people? Don, you should be able to.
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah, just a note, someone asked about the ride vehicles. You said you had photos. In one of the documentaries about the fair that I have on DVD, it might be the one that Barbecue Productions did, there is about a 4-second shot of those ride vehicles moving through the ride from the back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna have to find out which one it is. If I find out, I'll let you folks know next week. But that's the only picture I've ever seen. I didn't know you had pictures, Bill, but it's neat to see them actually moving, and there's a little bit of screen movement in it too, so.
Yeah, it was really spectacular. I remember going to it as a kid, and it was really well done with the, the fact that they had the curtains would keep you from seeing what was in the next room, but it also kept the sound from the next room bleeding through. So as you got there, it would open up, and then the different things would come on, the different films going around, and it was, I remember that was a real multimedia experience. They also had the bell system, was the same sort of thing. As you went through the moving chairs, you had all the different screens of things going on, and everybody had been to, to movie theaters, and you go to even the big ones, Radio City Music Hall, big screen. But the fact that there were multiple screens going on, the fair had so much of that, the Johnson Wax Pavilion, the IBM Pavilion. It was a real big thing for, multimedia experience. And the US Pavilion, the fact, like I said, you got in there and you went off the very first time. And I had some other shots. They also had displays along the way and the narration would talk about America's foray into space, and they had a model of the Surveyor spacecraft, and they would, the light would come down and shine on it, and they would talk about it. So they had, besides the film, they did have some 3D artifacts along the way that the spotlights were key to highlight. So again, I've tried, asking the National Archives, do you have any of this? No, we don't think so. And if they did, they said, it'd be in 40 different rolls of film, and what do we do with it? So it'd be great to have some, just like Disney took Circle Vision and they put out, a version of film, of the Circle Vision film, America the Beautiful, and they used different panels from it. It'd be great to, get some of these things redone, but I don't know anybody that's going to be able to tackle it. Dave? And I'll get to you in 1 second, Kathy.
I just wanted to share for Wayne. So the two pictures that Glenn Barker showed, the one of the 6-track was made by RCA, and you see that there was a cabinet to the left of it. Those were made by the Studio Machine Shop with the same technology that they used for film. So there was rollers and sprockets, and 35 millimeter magnetic tape it was the same. It looked like film, but it had tape oxide on it. So there was 6 magnetic tracks that you could record on it. And that motor was a synchronous motor, and it was locked to the motors that were running the projectors. So that's how they stayed in sync. But you notice the film was running vertically. Now the 1-inch tape machine was made by Ampex, and it was at an angle because that was 1-inch tape with no sprocket holes in it. And so it was an angle, and the tape was actually laying in that bend on the edge, and the tape was running kind of at that angle. So I was amazed when I walked in. I saw that. Wow, this is really this is great that Ampex invented a way to do that. Now those tape machines did not run as Rich told me. The 35 mag was running at 45 feet per minute, which was a slower rate than the normal magnetic sound, because it normally would run at 90 feet per minute. But because the faster it runs, the longer the tape, the bigger the bin. So there was only a certain amount of space available. Even though that was a large room, we had a lot of stuff to put in it. And it was designed to last for 15 or 20 years. So there was many areas of the room that at the opening of the park, there was nothing there. It was powered up. There was cable tray under the floor. It was designed for a future expansion. And in fact, when I went down there in 1971, the initial rides were installed, but I went back in 1973 and installed the Pirate Ride. And I was able to, there was space in the central control room and also in the satellite rooms. Pirate was by the Tiki Room and the Country Bear Jamboree. There was space in that room allocated for the amplifiers for the Pirate Ride. So it was a matter of building the equipment, taking it, putting it where it had planned to be, both in the central control room and as in the remote room. Same with Space Mountain in 1975. So for a number of years, the planning that was done by that initial engineering group really had the benefit of they had been looking towards expanding to the future. But bin loops were definitely an amazing thing to see.
It's funny when you mentioned about planning for space. When I went to work I left Disney, I went to work for Warner Brothers, and our computer room had been built, I forget what size computer, an IBM 370 or 390 or something. But over time, you start getting more computers, and a 3070. Well, now we're getting a 3090. Well, the stuff was getting smaller all the time, so with the major processor would be the size of my office now was a third of the size of my office. And we had a CFO, Ralph Peterson, that was, everything was a dollar. Ralph knew where every nickel Warner Brothers ever made was. And we were scared to death. He realized that we were starting to use less and less of the computer room all the time as this stuff was getting smaller and smaller. So we would go and purposely put where you could take like all the pictures Glenn showed of all the tape machines next to each other. We would put 5 to 6 feet between them And that when Ralph would come in once a year or so to look around, he'd say something, why is there so much space in there? He says, well, that helps keep them cool. This new equipment generates a lot more heat. But we were scared to death he was going to do something like, take the computer room and, decide that's where the paint shop should be in the other half of it. So yeah, our computer room, like I said, everything was getting smaller, but we were actually having to go buy more cables just to run stuff and spread it out. So Kathy, you had something? Let me unmute you here.
I hit that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Normally I listen to you by way of a PC or a laptop. Today I had to go by way of phone. My hubby had another meeting today, but he will check out the New Jersey thing, and I'm sure next time we talk, he will have some comments about that because he is from New Jersey and he has been to the World's Fair several times.
Oh, great.
So I just want to say thank you. I've enjoyed these, or we've enjoyed these talks as well.
Appreciate it. Again, being from New York, you always have to make fun of New Jersey, and it's unfortunate. Everybody thinks of New Jersey as, you cross over the Goethals Bridge into Elizabeth, New Jersey, and instantly have to hold your nose, or at least you did when I lived there. It was a terrible thing with all the refineries. But New Jersey has some wonderful spots. My family used to go to Lake Hopatcong, New Jersey, and Cliff had to get off to go get his COVID shot. I mean, I would love to go back to Lake Hopatcong. And there's some beautiful areas outside. And that's what the New Jersey Pavilion was trying to show New Yorkers and stuff, that we're not all petrochemical plants or polluted, factories or things like that. So the New Jersey Pavilion was a nice one to go off and try to convince you that there was life in New Jersey outside of pollution. Joey, you had something else? You're muted. There you go.
In about 1972, 71, 72, the New York Daily News reported about the phantom of the Federal Pavilion.
Yeah.
And apparently someone got in there and was turning the lights on and off. Apparently the lights, or some of the lights, were still working. And the lights on the panels were being turned on and off. People could see this from the highway. And the Parks Department got wind of it, and I think took care of it, and it went dark from that point on. But I'll never forget the phantom of the Federal Pavilion.
Yeah, when we do the demolition part, I'll be talking about it because I have a number of pictures of the pavilion, in the post-fair years. And one of the things they had done was there was an entire kitchen and everything inside the pavilion, which had been built they had a VIP lounge and they could cook up full meals. And for a long time, the federal government actually paid somebody to stay in the pavilion. He lived inside the pavilion and had a whole apartment, kitchen, and everything else. And then they finally said, we're not paying anybody anymore. They moved him out. But it turned out they had never turned off the electricity. And then when you mentioned the phantom of the pavilion, somebody from New York State decided to take a look and say, hey, here's how much electricity you've used since 1965. Here's what you owe us. And the federal government basically said, get lost. They also found out at the same time that nobody had been billing the electricity to the Port Authority building, which is now being used as the terrace on the park. And they got into a huge thing. Here's a back due tax bill for X amount of power bills, and I think they also had stopped paying their property tax. So yeah, when they left the fair and they left some of these buildings behind, nobody ever thought that maybe you needed to like pull the fuse, turn the plug off or whatever. And the whole thing with the phantom, yeah, I've seen it in the Daily News. Who is he? Who's he getting in? And the police would lay trap waiting for it and to surround the building. And the lights would come on. So
it wasn't me, Bill. I was only 10.
Hey, the things I did when I was 10, I don't know. Somebody was saying, yeah, years ago, Jim sent me pictures of the Federal Pavilion. I have a bunch of pictures. The Federal Pavilion, getting run down over the years, and there's some sad shots of it in the 70s, and we'll go through it. And I'll get back to you on your last email, Jim. I see your note there. Yeah, I did get it. I was going crazy yesterday trying to finish this up. Glenn's going to show us some other toys. What else you got, Glenn?
there. Sorry, I got kicked off. I tried to put this picture up because I think David was talking about it, and all of a sudden my whole computer went off, so I had to restart it. And then whoever's on the thing wouldn't let me in, so I started to call Rich Barnes to put his hand up. And then
Oh,
I
there's
got
Rich,
in.
yeah.
So here's the picture. I don't know what you were saying about it, Dave, if you wanted to still comment on it.
Where is Dave?
Dave, he's unmuted.
Yeah, he's unmuted.
Oh,
Dave English?
I can't see the picture, but is it the one of the
Well, it's
bin?
behind me. It's look on my virtual thing.
Oh, got it. Okay.
You can make it big.
Yeah, I just need to go to the screen where you're, oh, I got it. Okay. Yeah, so you can see in this picture, those are in the nearest on the right is the actual tape machine where the magnetic heads are. And then to the immediately where you see the mag tape coming in and out, that's the storage cabinet for it. So if there was more than 6 soundtracks, 2 of those machines would be interlocked together so that you could have 12 soundtracks. And the thing that that Wayne was asking about for videotape, the problem with a bin is you can't be running this tape very quickly because you're trying to keep the media, the magnetic tape, from rubbing against itself. I mean, that's why there's the loop cabinet. And the loop cabinet, when you get to the end, you're back to the beginning. So if the show is running continuously, like It's a Small World, you never have to rethread the cabinet because, again, it's a continuous loop. So
Right.
the same thing with any of the other, Circle Vision stops as you load people in, but there are shows, and Hall of Presidents has a pre-show and a main show. And it turns out because the pre-show was done by WED and the main show was done by the studio in Burbank, and WED is in Glendale, a short distance away. The soundtrack for the audio and electronics part of the show was on a bin loop machine, and the soundtrack for the film part of the show was on this 35 millimeter mag machine. So when it switches from the pre-show to the main show, we had to switch between one tape machine and the other because, like Bill said, different divisions were at Disney worked independently. And it wasn't so much a matter, it probably was the case that people thought somebody else was taking pictures. There was Gary Kruger, who was a photographer from WED, and he did take he was a great photographer. He took lots of amazing pictures, but there was very little taken of behind the scenes because we all treated it as confidential. I mean, I would have never told you about Madame Leota in the day because that was part of the magic of going to the park and seeing something. You didn't reveal how it was being done. So today I go to the theme parks, I go to American Adventure, and there's this one ride where you get in this ride vehicle and the vehicle drives around on a patio in sync to the music. I have no idea how they're doing it. And I won't ask my colleagues that work there because I know that's not something they should tell me. So it is only with the passage of time that I feel like I can share that. And it's because this is being recorded. That means everybody on the internet has access to it. And I don't want to reveal it.
Well, it's interesting on some things like the GE Pavilion for the 64 fair. There's a tremendous photo archive of the building, which I mentioned. I got a copy of, all the railroad tracks and everything else. The trouble is, and somebody saved that because the architect saved it. Disney did take a lot of pictures of stuff of building the things, but then nobody saved it because you build it in 64 and about 69, it's taking up space. Somebody else has got to have a copy of this. I don't want to keep it and just get rid of it. So there was, copies of stuff, and then you try to find out, do you have okay, you get rid of all the prints. Who has the negatives? I don't know where they went. They're somewhere in that box, and the box is 10,000 rolls of film, you know, and then you've got to pay somebody to go through and look at 10,000 rolls of 35 millimeter film. So more stuff may show up, but it's just a matter of, again, you know, you guys know really well with Disney, if you don't have a charge number, there ain't nobody going to be looking at those 10,000 rolls of film. There are many times I actually have Disney departments get in touch with me asking if I can provide a picture of something because they don't have the time or budget to go get it from, or a charge number. So they'll say like, hey, Bill, if I buy you lunch the next time we're at the studio, could you send me pictures of this? And we're even talking Disney movies, because I have a big publicity photo collection from Disney movies. So people say, hey, do you ever have any pictures of the black hole or anything? I said, well, you gotta have the black hole. I mean, that's modern. Oh yeah, I can't get a charge number out of those guys. They want $50 a picture, and you'll do it for a cheeseburger. Yeah, I will. I'm cheap. So it's really funny, you know, when you're getting, like I said, calls from Disney. Rich, you got your hand up there. You need to unmute yourself, sir. There you go.
Just a couple of things. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Ended up being my first wife in 1979.
I'm sorry, you cut out for a second. You turned your head away. Could you say that again?
The girl in Glenn's photo in the red jumpsuit is my first wife.
Oh.
I married her in 1979 in California.
Well, I hope it brought back some happy memories.
Yeah,
If not, you
yeah.
can pick it up with Glenn.
Well, the other thing is the bin loops had an issue with the tapes got compacted inside the bin. We had to go through all kinds of things trying to make it work so it wouldn't jam up. And so there was a whole story behind the bin loops and making them work.
Well, as I said, if I can convince you, WED alumni to come back and share more secrets, and again, just looking at that picture, it just took me back. All of a sudden, I was 26 years old again, and saying, "Oh man, neat stuff, great toys."
Me too.
If you notice, I put the other one back up with the bin loop machines. This is, I think, the real reason why there was a handoff, as we called it, with Hall of Presidents, because the first part of the film or the show was all on 5 35 millimeter projectors. 7, were they 35? Help me here, Rich. I think they were 35. And the so with the motion picture to synchronize it, you need to have the sprocketed media. But then once the president's or the film was over, the screen went up, we lowered the speakers down into the floor, and it was all just now a stage show. So one of those boxes, you can see those glass fronts there. Behind that is all the 1-inch tape that just spilled into it and then was pulled up the other side and started over in a loop. So you could get 14 tracks of sound on one of those, whereas you only got 6 tracks with the 35. So they took up a heck of a lot more space.
Yeah, they used to give tours down there for all the new employees, and it's a tremendous spot. I think they actually, I don't know if they still have a behind the scenes tour that they sell people that they take into the DAX anymore or not. But you know, if you're down in Florida, they have a tunnel tour that you can sign up for, and even if you don't see DAX, you can get to go see the hydraulic trash compacting system. So there's just fun stuff down there.
The last time I was there, they had a kind of a museum of all these different types of machines that were not used anymore, but they just kept them. And they even had one of the animation program consoles, which was like a big table with a drawing of a man on it and knobs and switches all over it. And that's what the programmers would sit and twist these knobs. And one of them has little characters on it that Bill Justice drew. You can imagine how bored they would get, you know, trying to do this stuff, and all the time you wait for them to get it to work.
You know, years ago, Carol and I, we loved to go to England. I used to go a lot for business, and we were over there one time with the family. We went to the Royal Navy Submarine Museum in Portsmouth, and we walked in, and Carol said to me, "You look like you've seen a ghost. You're hit by a truck. What happened?" And it was something I had designed that was on display in the museum. And man, all of a sudden, did I feel old? You know, I mean, when I did it, it was so secret, I couldn't even tell my family what I did for a living. It was the launch control system, to get technical, the Mark 88 fire control system for the Poseidon missiles, you know, and now I walk in, all the kids are pushing buttons to see what they do with the dummy lights that come on. But it's so weird, and you look at the machines behind you to think they're in a museum. I mean, man, how come, everybody's getting old? I'm not. I don't know. It's really weird.
By the way, that first picture I showed with Walt with the two shuttle machines from the fair was a screenshot out of the TV show called Disneyland Goes to the New York Fair. And that I got it off of YouTube. So if anybody hasn't seen that, it's really good. It goes through all the different pavilions and he talks about programming. You see Wathel Rogers programming the father in the Carousel of Progress.
The whole metal mechanism.
Right.
D23 aired that as a giveaway for the anniversary of the fair, and they aired it in high def. I have a copy. If you'd like a copy, Glenn, let me know. I'll get it to you. It's a lot better than the YouTube copy. And one of my favorite shows of all time. So
yeah, it was a good one. That one and the Pirates of the Caribbean, I thought were really good. But you know what I have to comment on, Bill? Every time I'm looking at your picture there, it looks like you're wearing a halo.
If you work in a team, you've got to try Monday.
So you're an angel.
Yeah, well, you don't know me very well, do you? Wayne, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to say I understand the impetus not to ruin the magic, but I went to Epcot, I think back in the 80s, and I think they were just starting behind the scenes tours. And the tour guide started the tour by explaining that some Disney employees had wanted to do that for a long time. And management said, no, we don't want to spoil the magic. And the reply was, we see behind the scenes every day and we still think it's magic.
Yeah, for a long time, as people mentioned, they didn't want you taking pictures of anything, and for the most part too, it's your office. You don't go to work, take pictures of the office. So, I spent 6 years in Disney Studios, and I don't think I have any pictures I took during those 6 years. I've got pictures, down at Disneyland or pictures and various visits back, but you used to have a union card that if you didn't have a union card and you took a picture at the studio, the union would be all over your butt. And I kept thinking, I worked almost every Saturday and there was nobody from the union there. What the hell was wrong with me? I think about it now. God, so I went to Warner Brothers, I go on a Saturday, I take pictures of the back lot, the Dukes of Hazzard sets or anything. But there were all those wonderful Disney back lot sets at the time, that we used for Medfield College and the Western sets and everything else. But you got to work, it's like, the people you work with, you don't have too many pictures or anything because it's just the office. Urge.
Okay, you probably could hear me now.
Yes.
You said a couple of weeks you're going to do a presentation about construction. You may recall a couple of weeks ago, I uploaded 25 high-resolution aerial photos of the site under construction on your website. And they were on the topic of, here's a very early construction view. I had it under there. If you can dig them up, feel free to use them.
Great. Yeah, I've, as I was going through all these pictures for the last couple of weeks of trying to get things ready, it's like, oh, it's a great shot, but I can't use it because it's showing this, and I'll wait for that period of time. But I've got the early, very early things of them building the giant tire, so you can see everything that's inside without the rubber, outside of it, and digging pipes, tunnels and holes and all sorts of stuff. And it's actually kind of fascinating. Like the U.S. Pavilion was built by American Bridge Company, because again, it's on 4 giant pylons, and I'll go through pictures showing how they jack things up, did temporary shoring, loaded it down on the pylons. It's building the fair was really interesting. And somebody asked in one of the chats about the design of the buildings. Were they done because that's the design of the time? And for the most part, if you look at the fair buildings, they're really not usable in the real world. Like the Kodak roof and some of that. But that's what appealed to me so much at the fair, was that you could do these things that were absolutely dumb, stupid buildings, but they were amazing. You could build them out of triangles, you could build them round, you could build all sorts of weird shapes and do things with them that you weren't bound by. How do I make the most efficient, like by Ralph Pearson, CFO at Warner Brothers, he'd be looking at everything, what's the yield per square foot, and can we make the square instead of round? You didn't have that at the fair, and I love the architecture of it. I mean, again, one of my favorite pavilions was the Bell system, and just this giant floating cantilevered wings sitting up there. But even some of the other ones, Alaska with its igloo, I mean, that was the first igloo I think I've ever seen. You walk in. In fact, I can remember as a kid walking up and being very disappointed that when I put my hand on it, it wasn't cold. So
those aerial photos I sent you, most were taken in the summer of '63, and there was a couple taken a couple weeks apart showing the construction of the Bell Pavilion. And you can see in just a couple weeks how much more of the skin they attached to the steel framework. They were really moving along on that thing. And
yeah, somebody from Bell did quite a job of documenting, and I was lucky to end up with quite a bit of it, where it's even showing the offices, and I'll see if I show them where they had rotary telephones because they had not yet installed the electronic switching system for the touch-tone phones. So they went through, documented all sorts of stuff, and somebody dumped it, and I ended up, being able to get it over the years.
Yeah. Do you still have those aerial photos, or I have to send them to you again?
I probably have them, but if you want to send them, that's fine. What I will do is, again, they'll be using most of the ones that are unique to my collection, because I try to find, things that people cannot find easily elsewhere. But if you have them, I can spot a few of them in there.
How would I resend them?
You have my email, right?
Your personal email? No.
Yeah. Or you can use the contact me button on my my website. It's on there.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. You can contact me, send me a note. Dave?
I just wanted to, Glenn mentioned the programming console. So that was one of my jobs, was to package the electronics. And the customer was Wathel Rogers and Bill Justice, who were the programmers. And so that equipment ended up being not super large, but it was the size of a desk. Think of a regular office desk where the right-hand side where your drawers are. Well, that was where the equipment was, but it was a desk with a tilted top. And I went over there with a piece of foam core, and basically we changed the angle of the top until Bill Justice and Wathel said, "Oh, that's perfect." And the whole idea, there was a stick figure on the front of it that was painted. And then there was a knob, there was 32 control knobs that would generate an analog movement. And then there was toggle switches that would generate like an eye blink movement or anything that was on off. And that information then was understand, this was in 1970. There were no cell phones, there was no internet. All of those things that we think of today, when we went to Florida to install that, you had a pretty much unreliable, not finished phone system, a power system that was we were out in the boonies, so the power was flaky at best. But, and what preceded the DAC system, which stood for Digital Animation Control System, those letters. So when the last show at Disneyland was the Haunted Mansion, and when I worked on that and GE Carousel of Progress were we called it the CAM machine, but it was a large disc that had been punched with holes, and the outside of it was scalloped, and they cut them with paper initially, and there was an arm that had a light source at the bottom, and it had sensors at the top, and the disc would rotate through that arm, and there was a motor in the center of the platter, and it would rotate around in 60 seconds. So it took 1 minute to rotate. So as the disc went through the arm, if the outside was exposing the photocell, you would get 10 volts of signal, and if the photocell was closed off, you'd get 0. So you got a 0 to 10 voltage out of the machine, which represented the analog movement of a figure. And on that same card, there was 2 little places for a digital light to show through. And those represented then on-off functions. So to program that, Bill Justice and Wathel Rogers, they were pretty much the 2 guys, had to think about it, cut it with paper, scissors, try it, watch the figure after they put the platter, after they changed the platter, watch the figure move and keep doing that until they got the signal correct. Now the DAC system was a total, it was a computer system in 1970 using a Sperry UNIVAC machine. And this programming console, the guy could turn the programmer could turn the knob. That signal was processed in real time. It went to the computer because the computer was recording it. And then it came back in real time to the figure. So when he turned the knob, the arm moved. And it played in sync with the sound. So he played the sound, they could turn the arm and the guy would move. And it was recorded. So talk about revolutionary change. And that system was developed, it was a proprietary system. Now the reason Glenn mentioned the drawings on the console, so computer memory space was a premium in those days. And all of this real-time information had to be compressed. And so they did a compression system that took time. So the guys would program it, and then they'd have to sit at the console and wait for the computer to compress that signal where it could then play back all of the functions, because they would add one function at a time. They'd do the arm, then they do the elbow, then so they were building up the functions on this figure, and the figure's right in front of them, and the sound is being played back. So things like the Jungle Cruise in Florida, that programming desk was put on a Jungle Cruise boat out in the middle of the real Jungle Cruise with, oh, there's the picture, right. So the right-hand side of the console was the functions, basically to say we want to do this and that. And the left-hand side was the knobs that could be turned. And I'm not sure if this is the one that I designed. I think this might be we built a version later that was this is
a later version.
Yeah, so it was basically compressed down to the size of a, I mean, it was still like 30 inches wide by maybe 30 inches deep. But this one, all of the components that had been originally in the desk, technology moved forward, and we were able to build it into the console itself. But I don't know, the thing I wanted to share was I had little to do with conceiving of that whole system. By the time that I came from MAPO for 2 years, and then I went into the engineering group and went to Florida. The design had been worked out, and I was there to install it and learn about it. But the fact that they were able to, the company was actually able to build a theme park 3,000 miles from where it was designed, where all the cables were built in California, 10,000 or more of these multi-pair cables that were all measured on site. Yeah, it needs to be 26 feet long. They were built in California, shipped to Florida, installed in the cable trays, plugged in, and pretty much everything worked. I mean, just the amazing amount of design work that went into that is, to this day. I was talking to one of the other engineers where we worked together, and we were just like, we just didn't realize what we were stepping up to in terms of the challenges.
It's probably a good thing you didn't. You had tear your hair out. Here's a picture. You guys remember Dave, one of the guys that did a lot of the programming of it?
Yeah.
Doing
Later,
the America Sing show.
Later generation console that was much more compact. But the concept that I actually designed remained the same. It was tilted. And you notice there's no drawings on this. I think the one they have in Florida, and Rich can confirm it, actually has Bill Justice's, he was an animator. That's where he came from. So he had pictures of Snow White and the dwarfs, and they were running around the front of the console, and they just drew on it with pencil, and those of us that had built it and to make it nice and pristine and clean, it's like, oh my gosh, they're writing on our console. But
Hey, Bill Justice artwork is worth a lot of money today. So.
Oh, it is, yeah. And Bill and Wathel were just so nice, patient and clever, and the fact that we were designing this and building it as we went along, that same collaboration I got to experience when I went to work for feature animation, because I was the first technologist in 1985 that was hired. And we're talking about some images. I have some still pictures of graphics computer graphics before CGI, the first images that we generated using the computer for the Black Cauldron and the spittoons, the cauldrons that tumbled. We actually did that on a computer and plotted those to animation paper and merged them with classic animation cells.
Oh,
So,
remember all the early computer stuff on Great Mouse Detective, all the clock gears and everything.
The gear scenes.
Yeah.
But again, those were done before you had the graphic user interface of today.
Oh yeah.
And literally Tad Gilo, who now lives in Washington State, had to build those gears point by point by point.
Yeah.
And using movie.byu software, build the gears and then arrange it in such a way that we could animate it. So I'm actually doing an article for DDA, or DDA Getz has interviewed me talking about early animation at Disney for his books, Walt's People. So I'm currently editing a transcript that was a result of his 7 90-minute interviews.
Oh,
so
okay.
I got 60 pages. But again, it's a chance to be able to share an amazing time and the collaboration of so many people that work together, because you don't do anything like that by yourself.
If people do get a chance to go see the show that Glenn mentioned, Disney Goes to the World's Fair, they show Wathel with the original thing they recorded. He's got a metal thing, looks like a torture device. And
yeah, helmet.
They go through the canned equipment, cutting the things with a piece of paper, making them all work. And then the tape machine, as Walt's very proud, he's there. One machine stops and the other one rewinds, but doesn't do it quite on cue. And poor Walt is like, any second now. Which you can tell they didn't want to do another take, but finally the thing, oh, okay, there it goes. So, well, listen, I thank everybody for joining me. And again, I appreciate everybody, listening. When I'm doing this and I get about 45 minutes into it, I said, oh God, I hope somebody's still out there. Because there were so many things to just cover today. It's just like a random memory dump of stuff. Next week, again, I want to do the international pavilions. There were some that were really neat. Some that were sort of small, like Berlin was sort of small. We'll go through the reasons and the budgets and that sort of thing. So my tentative plans are international pavilions, the fair at night, the building and the demolition, and then in 4 weeks we'll flip a coin and see what we come up with. So again, hint, any guest presenters. Leslie, maybe you could take us on your favorite ice cream shops of the world. So how's that sound?
Oh, absolutely. My favorite right now is Brewster's in Garden Grove, south of Disneyland on Harbor. Very good.
Have you been to Handel's Ice Cream? It's up here in Northridge.
No.
Handel's was a shop started somewhere in the Midwest, and they had one out in Rancho Cucamonga or someplace that my daughter lived worked for San Bernardino DA, went out there and loved it. And their ice cream is really good. And they have one here in Northridge. And Carol's not real big on ice cream. She loves more ices and things with fruit flavors. And as she'll tell you, they're very, very good. So when the pandemic's over, we'll get together and I'll take you to Handel's, and then you can weigh in and let me know on how they do compared to the others.
That would be wonderful.
Great. Well, thank all, and look forward to seeing you folks in another week. Again, some folks get the emails from me each week. Other people go to the website. If you are getting the link off worldsfairphotos.com/Zoom and you'd like to be added to the mailing list with the direct link every week, just use the contact me button and I'll add you to the email list. But again, that site does have a list of the current talks, the upcoming talks, and all the past talks in case there's anything you want to go and catch up on. So thanks. Hope everybody has a nice day, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks again,
Thank you, Bill.
Bill. Thank you very
Take
much.
care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.